Well, good morning. The presentation that I've got here really is just to cover probably more the mechanics, the cover crop side, the way we use cover crops and how we can build them into the rotation. What I've also got is some of the techniques that we can use as a result of some of the changes that we've seen to things like EFA and the introduction of some of the new stewardship schemes. So bear with me. A good photograph to start, and not specifically put up to shock people, but just to focus the mind. Jimmy showed a fantastic photograph of soil leaving the field through the farm gate, and this is a photograph of soil that's left the field through the air. Now, you might want to read into that photograph in a number of different ways. It was floating around on social media through the snow, through that heavy period of snow. What I found interesting was that it's probably happening through other times of the year, other periods of the year, but just because we had white snowdrifts, it probably amplified the effect of what was going on. I'm not here to try and say how we should correct that or even why it happened. Fine snow, very strong winds, so the soil was probably in a position where it was going to blow out the field. But should we have let it blow out of the field, I think was more the fact that I was actually looking at, and the management of that field from that particular farmer, who I don't know who he was, and I don't really want to know. The most important thing is, how do we look at avoiding that? And was it soil condition, organic matter very low? Is the soil in a fragile condition? Is it the management? Are we ploughing the soil too early? Focuses the mind in terms of what we can actually probably do on our own farms in terms of looking at the management. What this is really going to do is just bringing clarity to efficient on-farm use of EFAs. There's a lot of things that we can do with EFAs, and I'll go into detail. Protection of soil and water through our various management actions, countryside stewardship schemes that have been introduced that I think are more manageable on our farms, and effective use of cover crops. We know it's an evolving landscape. We know there's been much change in the way we are being viewed from government and new policy, and despite ongoing fears, and there is a lot of ongoing fears. If you look at the majority of people, they actually covered their EFAs in a very simple way by using peas and beans. Well, as a result of the change, that's gone. So we've got to use wise use of how we actually manage our land to meet greening and stewardship requirements. They're not going to go away, and we've got to actually embrace them and work them within our management system. I think the background, as we've seen, and we keep seeing this in various publications, is the protection of water, the protection and improvement of our soil, looking after our flora and fauna, looking after our wildlife and our birds, and the man who seems to be behind a lot of this, Mr. Gove. We're also looking now at his 25-year environmental plan, and that is actually, if you have the time, and probably most of you don't, to actually read sections of that, makes quite a lot of sense. So we've got the details of EFAs, and I might not go into too much detail of that, because I'm sure you're all understanding the mechanics of that, but more than 15 hectares of land, plant protection products no longer available, so this took away our very easy pea-bean approach. And the options that we've got available to do this are hedgerows, nitrogen-fixing crops, catch and cover crops, buffer strips, field margins, and the fallow option. So a quick look at the ratios, and I won't spend too much time on this, but if we look at nitrogen-fixing crops and the ratios that we've got, fallow land, buffer strips and field margins, catch and cover crops, and hedgerows that are on the farm, and why not? If we've got hedgerows on the farm and it's a permanent feature, then let's measure them and let's get them into the calculation. They're not going away, they're not changing dramatically, so we must make best use of them. Just a quick calculation at the bottom was really there just to show how one particular farmer might have achieved his AFA requirements, but that is very typical of one farm, will be different for virtually every farmer. So I just wanted to go through very quickly some opportunities, because what I'm seeing in the change mindset to AFAs with the loss of peas and beans is a lot of farmers are probably confused as to how they can tackle AFAs on their own particular farm. And I often hear a bit of doom and gloom, and people are saying, well, it's a difficult thing. But actually, if you start to use a little bit of lateral thinking and mindset, can actually make these work much more effectively for you. So the follow option, 1st of January to 30th of June, we're taking the precise approach, and we're parking the poor land. We're attempting to park the poor land we all have, and I would think it's very rare that a farmer hasn't got in his mind a small area of his farm or a percentage of his farm that is probably not contributing to his bottom line. So parking the poor land is the way to utilise. So I'm a big believer of getting more from what we've been given or what we have to comply with through legality. So on a fallow land, for an example, we're allowed to have a wild bird seed mix, we are allowed to have a nectar flower mix, or we can just leave it fallow and do nothing, which would be, I think, the worst option to take. So wild bird seed mix, and if we look at it in carefully, we can use a soil structure mixture. We wouldn't send it to you as a soil structure mixture, we would send it as a wild bird seed mix on your invoice. But in your mindset, actually make the land work much more effectively for yourself by using a soil structure mix. If you look at the top picture, that's a deep rooting tillage radish. There are a number of varieties out there. This is just one particular variety that we've majored on because we think it works. And what's it doing? Basically, subsoiling, not burning steel, it's not using steel, it's not using diesel, and it is actually doing some good. Something that is subsoiling the land while you're asleep must be a benefit. The bottom one is really the picture of that particular soil structure mixture, and we can see the benefits that we've got there. Pollen and nectar mixtures, nectar flower mixtures, and we do another relatively cheap and tailored mixture, which is an annual pollen and nectar, specifically done for 1 year, can be used in your AFA fallow, and again, we've structured it to be cost effective. So, catch crop. This is often the short-term one, it actually was 20th of August to 14th of October. That's actually increased by 2 weeks. It was the 1st of October. It was more manageable as it was. Now it's got 2 weeks later. It's probably taken some of the effective management techniques that we could use before and made it a little bit more difficult. Then has it? Think a little bit out of the box, think laterally. We can actually, in an 8-week period, do various things. We have growers in certain parts of the country, more southern growers, that have struggled with cabbage stem flea beetle control through the removal of neonicotinoids. And as a result, they're now looking at maybe taking oilseed rape out of rotation. I'm not here saying that you should do that. That's not my intention. But if it looks as though that isn't working for you, coming out of a barley, going into a short-term cover crop, catch crop, boxing off the AFA, and then into a winter wheat. Similar again, more southern growers with blackgrass problems. That option has fitted very, very well for people who want to box off the AFA and still come in with a late drilled winter wheat for blackgrass control. What we're actually looking at is trying to do more with an option that we've been given. Pratex oat and Defender radish. If you look at my particular part of the world, East Yorkshire, if you look at the photograph at the top, that's a field of peas that's gone off with fusarium, foot rot, or is it just the fact that we've got low organic matter levels and the soil is more prone to slumping? If we can bring in a short-term crop, bring in some buoyancy, we don't have to come in on the 14th of October and destroy it, we can leave it longer, we can come in later and we can plough and we can bring some buoyancy back into that soil. We're not going to repair the organic matter levels overnight, it's going to be a longer term process, but if we find a way of improving that soil structure slowly but gradually, and avoids that kind of thing taking place in the next pea crop, much value and increase in margin for the farmer. The AFA opportunities for cover crop could be a combination, could see it as a combination of catch crop and fallow, but again, a number of EFA compliant and dual purpose cover crop seed mixtures have been developed to actually use this in specific ways within your rotation. If it's something you've got to do, then let's get the best out of it, let's make it do more. If we look at one of David's type soil maps above, it shows clearly the areas in the field that you might not want to farm. This is only one picture. I don't know the history. I don't know whether that's what we're seeing over 5 years, but over 1 year, it identifies the area that we might want to select those areas to go into either EFA, or we might even want to select them to go into a stewardship scheme. They're probably the areas that are not contributing to your 5-year bottom line and gross margin. So we have, and was introduced to us, and I'm not going to go into great detail of it. Jenny's here today, Jenny Stafford, who will give you a much more detailed overview of how these work. But we have 2 new offers that were given to us on the in February this year. And as a result of Mr. Gove's observations of how complicated the stewardship schemes actually are, he introduced the simplified scheme. When we look at it in detail, we have a mixed farming offer and we have an arable offer. Basically, the kind of payments that we're getting are there. That's the arable offer payments. We've got to select different categories from different parts of it. It's not rocket science, and every farmer is told that he will get an agreement. So a simplified online application, and probably with a bit of help from Jenny in terms of how you go about that, a no-brainer. Well worth having, I think, on your farm to take care of some of the areas that are probably not contributing to your bottom line. That's really just the mixed farming options. And as I say, not to go into detail, not the time today, but it is something that you might want to consider. Optimising your soil and water, and this is where we just move on to some of the crops and how they perform and how you can actually look at different cover crops for your particular rotation. But think crop production, take the whole farm approach. Compliance and stewardship are here to stay, so let's use them. Let's not chastise them, let's use them, let's fit them in, and let's allow them to add to your bottom line and your gross margin. Compliance and stewardship, utilise the expertise available. Soil health, what we've been discussing this morning, rotations, livestock, compliance and risk management. Risk management on areas that are maybe not producing the gross margin that you would like and affecting the gross margin of the rest of the field becomes risk management. A very interesting but not a new slide, and this is where I've just got a few slides on how some of the cover crops have performed. This was work done in 2015 and 2016 with the University of East Anglia. It was done in conjunction with King's and various other organisations, but it provides some fantastic information. If we look at rainfall on the top and then we look at nitrogen loss, they track almost immediately. So as soon as you're getting high rainfall, you're also getting very high losses of nitrogen. Phosphate below, a similar track, a similar pattern, but it's very interesting how quickly when it starts to rain, we start to lose our valuable nutrients. This just takes that trial a little bit further. Monitoring of field drains. This actually just gives you an idea of some of the things that we're doing in these fields and the effects that they had. The top one, control ploughed left over winter. No action, just a ploughed field. And we look at the milligrams of nitrogen per litre lost on that, and you see the result there, 12.3. The second one down, 18.27, but an average of 15.3 milligrams per litre lost on a ploughed field. As we come down, our crop, our winter wheat crop, that we would view as a cover crop, we would always view that as some form of cover, but when we actually look at the loss of nitrogen, we see that it's actually not very effective in terms of retaining nutrients in the field. So then we start to look at a number of very basic cover crops, and winter oilseed rape, another crop, obviously, that we're using, much less in terms of nutrient loss. And then we start to look at a number of radishes, not complicated mixtures here, but just really trying to show some results. And we look how quickly the nutrient is retained within the crop and within the field. Still your produce. You've paid for it. One day it was sat on a lorry as a 500 kilogram bag, like what you're leaning against now. Looking at those, you see the value. Why shouldn't it be the same for the nutrient that's been lost out of the field? Again, a number of cover crops and their performance. And some of these figures are starting to get replicated now over 6 years. So we're actually starting to get quite confident with some of the mixtures, some of the actual types of species that we put in, and where we might like to actually pitch them and use them for different soil types. So after 6 years, we are seeing the radish in the initial figures that we took, the initial tests. We thought the radish was showing effective results, and that has transpired through into tests that we're still taking now on different parts of the UK and different soil types. So you see the turnip rape, and you see the mustard, the vetch rye. Vitality mix is a mix that would, thinking about it, be very suitable to this type of soil here. This type of high magnesium soil type would be very suitable to our vitality mix, more suited to that particular soil type, soil depth, and what we're actually trying to achieve. Our structure mixture would be more targeted at heavier clay, deeper soils, where we actually use different species, such as a deep-rooting tillage radish, which you saw on one of the previous slides, to actually break open the soil and subsoil. But the nutrient capture there, figures, have been very interesting. Alford, again, won't dwell on this, very similar to what we've just seen. The figures do keep filtering through as similar, but again, we're looking at similar mixtures, but we can actually see that some of the mixtures bear land. And here, we just took it a little bit further, because we're starting to look at whether some of these crops had any effect on blackgrass control. A huge subject. Lots of unanswered questions, but you've got to start looking, and here we started to see that we're getting some effect from the radish on the control of blackgrass. So interesting figures. Similar capture results here, but there we started to look at soil moisture scoring. So we wanted to start to look at how the soil was conditioned, ready for the drill, with a min-till drill as it was arriving in the field. We also looked at wheat vigour score as it had germinated and started to grow. And we also looked at the yield and protein levels. So we start to build up some very interesting data. Can't go into too much detail of it here today, but you do see that actually we're starting to build up a very interesting replicated trial. This is some work that we've been involved with. We're entering our third season. This will be our third season of spring sown crops, following a lineup of cover crops, which have been grown in the same place and will be the same types of cover crops. And you will see here, we've taken grain samples from 2016 and 2017. And we're looking at nitrogen content. So again, you can see what has come through as work to effectively control stubble, 1.43, 1.42. But then you start to look at one of our mixtures, the structure mix, 141, 146. Actually maybe not performed as well as what we would have liked. The Defender radish shines out through this trial at 1.51 and 1.51. And is there a reason for this? And I'll show you this on the next slide. So here we have the different types of crops or control systems that we've used in this trial. Control, do nothing, turnip rape, structure, Defender radish, radish mix, vitality mix, vetch rye, EFA mix 1. 2016 results and 2017. So we're starting to build up a picture of an increase in yield as a result of this replicated trial. Be interesting to see after this year, with the amount of rain, and actually a cover crop that hasn't performed too well. It's not as good, it's had a difficult year in terms of its growth, and the cover crop that we're actually that has been sprayed off, desiccated, is not as good as the previous 2 years. So it might skew the results. If it does, great. It's interesting to know if that's what's going to happen. The one that does highlight each time through this is a Defender radish. If you look in there, we've got radish mix on the right, and it's not performed as well. Defender radish on the left. We are trying to get the answers as to why this is the case. My gut feeling is, and I won't go into too much detail, a Defender radish is what we call a multi-resistant radish, which means it has nematode control qualities. That is really the only difference between the Defender and the radish mix. Are we seeing a build-up of free-living nematodes in that area? Probably. We have tests undergoing at the moment to try and find out whether that is the result. And did it perform better? Because in that scenario, and it's gut feeling here, can't be backed up with too much science, but at the moment, did the cover crop grow better because it was under less pressure from group grazing nematodes, and as a result, did it capture more nutrient, and has that filtered through to the end result? And these are some of the trials that at this moment in time here today, we don't have all the answers, but we're heading in the right direction. So you can just see the yield average 2016, and then you can see the yield average 2017, which was interesting in that we're going up. We will see what happens after harvest 2018 and see what the result is. Just one last section, and this is two guys that seem to have put on maybe too much weight as time's gone on, but my colleague Paul Brown, who I've worked with on cover crops for 7 years and have a tremendous amount of time and respect for, and myself, and what we decided to do was to use a mycorrhizal inoculum. And we'd heard a lot about mycorrhizal, and can we actually trigger it in an area where we think there is very little mycorrhizal activity. So we decided to go out there and find a suitable mycorrhizal inoculum. We inoculated a number of cover crop mixtures and cover crop straights, and we observed these through the growing period to this point. And RLC is root length colonised, and root length colonised is really done by a company. They're analysing this in much detail for us, and we're actually working out that non-brassica mix treated, and then obviously control, no treatment, treated radish, and then treated oat, and controlled radish, and then control oat. The figures have been very interesting. The growth of the crop in the field certainly gave us some indication that something was going on. At one stage, the Phacelia was 6 inches higher in the treated area than the non-treated area. And that came through to the point where then we started to get heavy frost and snow, and everything sort of got hidden then by poor weather conditions. But the way to look at this, and a replicated trial again, is important. That what we've done is we burnt off those areas, and then we've direct drilled in. So we've direct drilled in, and we were lucky enough last week to find a 25-minute window in the weather, and I think that's about what it was, where the soil was dry enough for us to be able to go and direct drill in spring wheat, and we're now going to monitor those through the growth stage of the spring wheat and see if we can see anything. The idea is that we possibly can keep the mycorrhizal activity that we've generated in the cover crops going through into the barley. Can we see a yield? Going forward, we probably should have tried to keep some species in that cover crop alive, and looking at it in the future, we've probably got to use a number of clovers. So, last slide really is how can we help you, the King's team? Advice on how to successfully integrate EFA requirements, agri-environment agreements. Jenny's here today, and I was working with Jenny on some workshops yesterday, and it was a very successful day. We had a number of farmers come in, and we got really into the detail of how they would integrate this, why, if it's right, and looking at various gross margins. So Jenny's here to do that. Arable and forage cropping. Obviously, sporting does creep into this. People do like to shoot. and supply of correct seed and support option delivery with our ongoing management advice. Thank you.